So I've got a lot of different books here right now, and a lot of different types of books: hardcover, paperback, library with the plastic on it, dust jackets, old, new, graphic novels. So I thought I would just basically make this a video about interesting books that I own, that I like, and just tell you why I like them or think that they're significant. So the first book I'll show you, what's interesting and significant about this was written during the presidency of Lyndon Johnson. As you can see, it was $1. This was a desktop published book. The Palo Duro Press, Box 390, Canyon, Texas. This is the most popular and highest sold desktop published book in history. This book was written by a man named J. Everett Haley, a Texan, who his information is on the back, who definitely opposed Lyndon Johnson and felt that his presidency was illegitimate. Now, not too much about him being behind the Kennedy assassination, but more about he felt that Johnson had maneuvered his way into the White House by nefarious means. So it is an interesting book, an interesting perspective. I don't particularly agree with everything in it, but nonetheless, this is a time capsule of a period in time when we had transitioned from having a lot of trust of the government to having a lot of distrust of the government. Between the Kennedy assassination and Watergate, there was a lot of, as you can see, counterfeit conservative. A lot of the topics in this book are probably would raise a lot of eyebrows today. But the most significant thing about this book is that when he was in prison, languishing away, Jack Ruby, the man who assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald, said that if you wanted to understand what really happened with the Kennedy assassination, why he did what he did, and why everything happened, he said, read this book. So, and that is an absolute fact. You can verify that, you can validate it. And that fact is not very well known, but this book is easy to find. So and it talks about, he writes, power well established and entrenched, claiming authority but methodically destroying the values of the common ground, is diabolic in character. The satanic aspects of such government, combining power, a divine attribute, with wickedness and irrationality, are usually underscored by a quality of confusion. So, interesting. But that is what Jack Ruby said. Take that for what it's worth. Moving on, this is The Ocean Express. To Nelson from Aunt Jenny. You can see the cool in paper on the inside. Or Clint Webb aboard the Sea Tramp. And there's a engraving in the front. Arthur of Swept Out to Sea, or Clint Webb among the Whalers. The Frozen Ship, or Clint Webb among the Sealers. From Sea to Sea, or Clint Webb on the Wildjammer. And this is sort of like a Tom Swift sort of adventure. Copyright 1913. That should tell you something. If you know much about that time period, before World War One, Nancy Drew, Tom Swift, all of these action characters appeared in these book series. I mean, this is kind of like before comic books. These were the equivalent of superheroes. I mean, Superman hadn't been invented yet. Batman hadn't been invented yet. So you had these characters, and they got in these sort of family-friendly adventures. And this is an action-adventure book. And, I mean, this is the year before World War One began. And this book is just something for a young adult to read and enjoy. But at the same time, if you just like fast moving action and sort of the daring do and everything, you probably find something like this interesting. It's still quite readable. It's in really good shape for being over 100 years old. I mean, you could pick this up and read it and not worry about it. It's got a little, it's got a lot of foxing, and I wouldn't be too rough on the pages. But this is a good example of a action adventure book from 1913. And what it looked like, what the inside cover looked like, it was to Nelson. He was probably a kid, or a teenager. So, just really interesting little time capsule. Let's see. Next, I have Around the USA in 1,000 Pictures, edited by A. Milton Runyon and Vilma E. Bergen or Bergano. It's something that might be Bergano. Now, this used to have a dust jacket that was probably really pretty, but this is a beautiful photo book. And that's all it is. It's just a book of pictures. And what's interesting too is this is 1955 America, so you've got all your states, and all you just go state by state, and there are photographs of everything, first with a map, and then pictures of all kinds of stuff from each state. Gracious, Georgia, South Carolina. This is the South. This is where I live. Florida. That's Miami Beach. Jacksonville. Boca Raton. Daytona Beach. Palm Beach. They don't have Pensacola or Panama City in. I don't think they were as big a deal in 1955. I mean, they existed, but I just don't think that they were the big locations yet. Clearwater Beach, Tallahassee. Alabama. Alabama means azaleas, cotton, and corn. The statue of Vulcan in Birmingham. Mardi Gras, Mobile. Actually, Mardi Gras started in Mobile. The Coliseum, where the Alabama State Fair is held still to this day. It's fun to go to. It's always sponsored by Alaga or Alaga. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's a syrup that's made here in Alabama, and it's really good. I always buy a bottle when we go to the fair. And then the other parts I like are seeing all the animals, and I just think it's cool. Helen Keller, of course, is from Alabama. Mississippi, that's our next door neighbor. Louisiana, Arkansas, Chicago. Wow. And that's 1955. So So basically, the idea of this book is to get you excited about traveling. Oh, what's that? Mount Rainier. Mount Spokane. That's Mount St. Helens. This is 25 years before it erupted. I remember when it erupted. I was in school. Interesting on two levels. Number one, to see just all of the pictures of things in the United States. And number two, to see how things looked then. Nevada, Las Vegas. Beautiful things in Arizona. Monument Valley. White Sands. Texas, our largest state, is a world of its own. I've only been to California as a child, and I've never seen it as an adult, and I would really like to see it one of these days. It looks amazing to me. So that's around the USA in 1,000 pictures. What do we have next? This book is Robert A. Heinlein set. I may be mispronouncing his name. I read it. I've never actually heard the name said except by other people who might also be mispronouncing it. I always say Heinlein. But it's a very simple dust jacket. It has pictures of planets, a picture of him, and it has 4 stories. And I picked this up because I'm a fan of Starship Troopers. I liked the movie a lot, and I'm sorry, it's 3 stories, but the book is nothing like the movie. Completely. It even starts out in the first chapter. One of the characters who was a main character in the movie gets killed in the first chapter. I liked the movie. It's a love it or hate it movie. And Flores was one of the main female characters in the movie. So, Starship Troopers is this part of the book. It's a good little read. It's a whole novel. Then, now I can also read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And look how the text has gotten smaller. So, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is here. But then when we get to Time Enough for Love, it's the longest section of the book, and look at the text. much smaller. So they're packing in a lot of story here. And this alone is 600 pages from here. Pretty well, almost 600 pages with that tiny text. So that would be a real long read. But it looks interesting. It's got the music notes. So there's a lot of reading to do here. Inside it is a bookmark I found when I got it. It's an old receipt from 1996 from Pet World. Pet World. Pet World Boarding House? Bazaar House? I'm not sure. It's Pet World. It's a big book. Okay, let's do something a little more modern now. This is Montage of Heck. This was a documentary from HBO. Oh, coffee time. So it's all about Kurt Cobain. And I think what I did like about the documentary were like the cartoons, the drawings. And the book is beautifully done. The end papers. I think this is some of Kurt's artwork, like a detail of it. The artwork in the book is really cool. It's almost like a graphic novel. If you're interested in Nirvana, or it's definitely a must-have for you, but in itself as a book, as a work, it's really just beautifully done. So where they don't have pictures of his life or whatever, they fill in with these drawings. It shows how they made that album cover. Yeah, it's funny. We've come a long way since the 90s. I was in my 20s when all this stuff was going on. And it was I don't know. It does seem fairly dated now. I still think there's a lot of attitudes in the '90s that didn't age well. Some of it is still really good, and sometimes I listen to it and get sentimental a little bit. But a lot of it was this Gen X stuff, and I'm a Gen Xer, but a lot of it was just so. I don't know. I'm also a Gen Xer who had to work a lot over the years, so it's kind of hard to be so self-absorbed sometimes. At a certain point, you realize that the things that happen are going to happen, and you just have to sort of roll with it in life. This is let's take a detour into the 50s again. This is Main Street Merchant, a Bantam book complete and unabridged by Norman Beasley. And if you look on the cover, it looks like a novel at first, but actually what this is about is the founder of JCPenney, and it's a little paperback book, and it has pictures, and it's the history of JCPenney if you're interested in that. But more special than that is it's autographed by JCPenney, and he wrote something underneath here, and it's and I don't know what it says. It almost looks like an equation. Something n equals. That looks like in division, where the a dividend of 2 or maybe square root of 2. You can see where it says signed. This is a signed copy of this book, signed by JCPenney. In 1948. This is a 1950 copy of it. Now, it's not worth that much. From what I understand, he signed thousands and thousands of these. You can find, if you want your own signed copy, and if you got a little bit of money, you can go on eBay and grab yourself one. James Cash Penney. It's, like I said, it's not worth a tremendous amount. You can get a better version than what I have. It's just interesting to have a book signed by James Cash or JCPenney that I own, with these pictures and this history of a store that many of us in America have walked into at some point or another. Maybe bought something from. I bought a few suits from it when I was young, when I was going on job interviews or whatever. I bought my first double-breasted suit at JCPenney, and I ended up wearing it more at church than I did for job interviews. And it's got a little index in the end. So it's interesting, just interesting, and I do really love the artwork on the cover. A lot. Alrighty, next is Forward with Roosevelt by P.J. O'Brien. And before we get too far into this number one is very old. This was made when Roosevelt was alive, before World War II, during the Great Depression. Number two, this is actually not the book. This is called a prospectus. A long time ago, and this time during the Great Depression, one of the jobs, and you might, if you ever seen a movie called Paper Moon, well, they showed Ryan O'Neal doing a job similar to this. One of the few jobs you could get, or to try to make money, is you were a door-to-door salesman, and one of the things people sold were books. So what they would do is they would show this to potential buyers, and it says, this prospectus contains but a few sample pages of the complete book and represents the text, the illustrations, and the binding of the complete book. The complete book you deliver to subscribers measures approximately 6 by 8 and 3/8 inches and over 1 inch thick. The stamping on the backbone of the book is shown on the reverse side of the prospectus. That's what that would be the spine of the book. See? It contains over 300 pages and has 40 illustrations printed on enamel finished paper. As presented by this prospectus, it gives the complete life story of Roosevelt, including his aims, ambitions, and his endeavors for Social Security. It is one of the largest and the best illustrated books ever sold at the price. Caution, do not be deceived. We caution representatives and the public against the unreliable catch-penny lives of Franklin, quote-unquote, lives of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, made with scissors and paste that will be thrown upon the market. The distinguished authorship of this book and the facilities of one of America's largest publishing houses stamps this book as authentic and reliable. You can protect the public by selling them this work. Now, it opens just like the book would. And with the pictures, and then table of contents, and then we break into a chapter, and then we have a few pages of the chapter, and then the next chapter. You see how that works. So that's how a prospectus was. It was just a sample, so they could review the sample, and then on the back of the, see, he kept to this, and then he would write down his buyers here. So this is what would have been on the dust jacket. That's the forward. You could pull that out and show it to people too. So basically, this guy would come to your house, show you this, and I mean, it's almost like an interview to buy a book, to purchase one book. This is the 1930s, so this was a job. This was one of the jobs that people could do, and there weren't very many. People were selling pencils and apples and everything, but being a door-to-door book salesman might have made some money, and maybe at this time this was a topic that people were really interested in. This guy might have been able to sell the book. So, but he would have carried around a lot of these. See, he would have had a whole case full of prospectuses of different books, and then he would show all of the different prospectuses to the client, and then he would write down their name in the back on that little section I showed you, and then he would order the books and then have the books shipped to the clients, and he would get a small commission. And that's how that worked. So this is just an interesting little book. This is, you can get a little bit of information from it, but this is an interesting piece of long gone history. So I thought you'd find that interesting. Let's look at this book. This is, if you look very carefully, you might recognize this as the poster to the movie Lawrence of Arabia starring Peter O'Toole. Well, this is the book Seven Pillars of Wisdom, exactly as told by Thomas Edward Lawrence in his thrilling masterpiece. This, and only this, is the incredible true story of Lawrence of Arabia. And I was initially interested in T.E. Lawrence because I watched Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and I thought the character of T.E. Lawrence was really cool, and I didn't know anything about him, so next thing I did is I watched Lawrence of Arabia, and I bought the book. And it is a very straightforward narrative of his time in the Middle East during World War I, where he was working with the different Arabic nations fighting against Turkey, which was part of the Central Powers during World War I. And he was a colonel in the British Army, and he began to adopt a lot of the customs of the Arabic people, the Bedouin people, by wearing the burmuse and the robes and horsemanship, carrying swords and knives. And very interesting man. He didn't like all of the fame, and he ended up changing his name. That's why the author's notes, it's signed T.E.S. because he changed his name to Thomas Edward Shaw, and he joined the Royal Air Force, the RAF, and just became an enlisted man. He died in the 30s in a motorcycle accident. But if you want a thrilling history of World War I in the Middle East, this is the book you should get. .650 pages with an epilogue. Very interesting stuff. Okay, next I'll show you this graphic novel. I was hanging with my friend in Germany, and me and my wife and him and his girlfriend, and he strongly recommended this book. We were at that time we were all Walking Dead fans in a big way, and he showed me this, and I was pretty amazed. I have a hard time reading the German, but I do think that the artwork is fantastic. So I picked this up, and it is really, really good artwork. Try to get the glare off of it here. Look at the Red Hot Chili Peppers shirt. I really. It's gritty, but very sort of cinematic artwork, if you know what I mean. Maybe because of the like different, like sometimes it's a very brown feeling or very blue feeling to sort of set a mood. Very cool. And the inside, very cool. I even think the cover alone is just amazing. Next, let's look at this. This is the original illustrated Sherlock Holmes, 37 short stories and a complete novel from the Strand magazine by Arthur Conan Doyle. I got this for $6.99 at Ollie's, and not to be confused with the complete works of Sherlock Holmes, you know, all of the books. This is the short stories that appeared in the Strand. And the Strand was a magazine in the Victorian times and existed for a good little while. And it printed Arthur Conan Doyle's stories in it, among other things. So this is all. So what got me interested in this is, I don't know, a few videos ago I did this Playmobil's Sherlock Holmes Hound of the Baskervilles, and I really enjoyed reading it, and I wanted to actually read the real Sherlock Holmes stories. And this actually includes the Hound of the Baskervilles because it was printed in the Strand from 1901 to 1902 as a serial. So I've got that whole book in here, and then I've got the Return of Sherlock Holmes and all of these stories, and they're fun and they're quick reads. And I can sort of see why he was so popular reading this. Now, the reason this was so cheap probably is because Sherlock Holmes has entered the public domain. But nonetheless, I really like this book because it faithfully reproduces how it looked in the Strand with all of the original illustrations. I mean, all of them. So you're reading this the same way it was read from the Strand magazine. All of these stories. And that is just really cool. And you see how the typeset changes, and it's just very cool. And I'm getting more and more into Sherlock Holmes. Because for years and years, I knew about him, was interested in him, but I never really understood what the appeal was until I started reading it. And what's a good way to make a comparison? When I was a kid, there was a series of books called Encyclopedia Brown. I used to like to read, and it gave you clues, and you sort of had to sort of solve the mystery in your head before it would reveal the answer. And to a weird sort of extent, although not exactly, it's kind of like that, but not exactly, because some of the clues aren't really revealed until he says so. But nonetheless, it's a fun way to read because it helps your mind. It gives you little things to look for and think about. And the more I read them, I swear, the more I observe things, the more it's interesting. I do really love these illustrations. they said that the illustrator Sidney Paget, he was the one who invented Sherlock Holmes's look with the huntsman's hat, or it's a deerstalker hat, and the cloak and the pipe. That all those elements were sort of invented by Sidney Paget. His hawk-like nose and everything. So anyway, this is just a great book to have when you have a lot of time to read, and make yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and just read a story. And to give you an idea, like, here's one. See, that's one whole story. That's not much, but it's a whole good story to read, but you can read it all in one sitting, and just highly recommend it. It's the original illustrated Sherlock Holmes by Castle Press. Incredibly cheap. Speaking of the Strand, what we have here is the Strand. This is the actual magazine, the Strand Magazine and Illustrated Monthly. This is volume 1, 1891, January through June, edited by George Nunes, and the issue from that time period is in this book because it's been chopped and glued into it, and all of these Strand magazine binders look exactly the same, except the dates are different, the volume may be different, the year's different. So, but there's something very special about this one. First, like, to show you the inside, this was produced like after the fact. If you were subscribed to the Strand or whatever, or if you just wanted to catch up on reading the Strand, you would get this book. Now, this book was created in 1891, so this is a piece of Victorian history. But in a second, I'm going to show you something very special about this one. London, Burleigh Street, Strand, 1891. There's no ads in it, so I think they cut the ads out and they just ran with the stories. But each issue is in here. And it's just a magazine because it's got sections, little portraits of people who are famous. It was like kind of like, People magazine to that extent, a Victorian version of a general interest magazine with stories in it. But this particular one from January to June is particularly special. There's a lot of pages in here. If I could find it. Here. Bear with me. I can't find it. Where is it? In this book, I'm trying to find it. This is it. The Voice of Science. Okay. That took way too long. This is Arthur Conan Doyle's very first story ever written for the Strand. And this is it from the actual pages. So I'm actually really proud to own this. This is the very first Arthur Conan Doyle's short story ever published by the Strand. It's not a Sherlock Holmes, but it sort of goes along with his idea. It's the Voice of Science. It's a very short story. It doesn't even have his name. I mean, his name isn't even listed. Not even his initials. It's just put here. But this is the very first Conan Doyle short story written for the Strand. And these are the very pages it was printed on. Because this is the Strand. This is the magazines. Just bound into this edition. So I thought you'd find that interesting. Sorry it took so long. The last book is a book I'm still working on. It's called Girl with a Pearl Earring. You may have seen the movie. It's a little different than the movie, but it's still similar. This is about a woman who becomes a maid for the artist Vermeer, and he eventually uses her as the model for the mysterious Girl with a Pearl Earring painting, and all of the sort of stuff that happens. It was a really good movie, and I like historical things, and I like the Netherlands. I'd like to go to Delft someday, but now when I go to the Netherlands, I buy Delft tiles because of that story. I think it's interesting, just a little bit of the culture. But I really liked the story, and so far it's a really good read, so I'd recommend it. And I think I'm done. This is about 45 minutes. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. And let me know what you think. Leave a comment, rate it, subscribe, hit the little bell icon, and I will be back before you know it with another video. All right, bye.